Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted that you can spend time with us today as we are starting off continuing the series of roundtable conversations. These engagements are with multiple ministries and across multiple industry sectors, with as many key stakeholders as possible invited to these conversations to discuss the impacts of climate ambition and what policies might help to facilitate this transition. Before we start, before I introduce the chairman of the CEO Action Network to give us his welcome note, we would like to run a short poll to get your feedback. Whether you think Malaysia should set an emissions neutral target by 2050. We understand we might be preaching to the converted, but there may be some who just wandered in to find out more. So we would like to hear from all of you, if possible. This series has been organized by Climate Governance Malaysia in close collaboration with the CEO Action Network, and it's going to be continuing over the next few weeks. You're all welcome to attend and to please participate, contribute your views where possible. We would love to hear from you. So right now, if I can invite the chairman of the CEO Action Network, Tengku Taufik, to please give his welcome address. Thank you, Tengku.
Morning, Datin. Thank you for that brief introduction. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good day to everyone. First and foremost, I want to extend my appreciation to our honored guest today, Puan Zakiah Jaafar, the TKSU of Policy from the Ministry of Finance, for taking time to join us today for the CEO Action Network Roundtable with the Ministry of Finance. This gathering, as Datin has alluded to, is part of a series of private sector roundtables with the government following the success of our inaugural roundtable held with the Ministry of Environment and Water, CASA, recently in April 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO Action Network, those of you who may have caught my article over the weekend at The Edge, has been established as a closed-door, peer-to-peer, informal network of CEOs representing 45 leading businesses, representing more than 20 priority sectors in Malaysia. And the focus is on sustainability advocacy, capacity building, true action, and performance. CAN and the Climate Governance Malaysia are jointly organizing the series of roundtable engagements with key ministries within the government, and these have been structured as a platform to discuss policies to strengthen our national climate ambition, hence the poll at the outset of today's session. Globally, businesses are under unprecedented pressure. Believe me, heading this little Fortune 500 company on behalf of 48,000 denizens, we are very conscious of this unprecedented pressure from investors, regulators, financiers, customers, and even our staff. The pressure is on to demonstrate our climate resilience against the backdrop of a warming world, and also to articulate our climate ambitions, as well as demonstrate our ability to transition in support of the Paris Agreement goals. This is further driven by the increased pressure leading up to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Conference of Parties, COP26, which is scheduled to be held in a town in the UK, which is familiar to me, Glasgow, in November 2021. To date, many businesses and countries around the world have declared some form of long-term commitment towards net zero emissions, backed by the requisite policies to support this transition. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I believe that fostering an ecosystem for the industry to move the needle on climate action requires a high degree of confidence in a stated national ambition. So, on this context, the involvement of private sector and industries with a sound understanding of public sentiment will be critical. In order to solve these issues, you require clear ideation, clear pathway for financing, and also concerted implementation. Therefore, there is an urgent need for the alignment of government policy between economic, climate, and energy policy priorities against a backdrop of socio-economic well-being of Malaysian citizens. I think the last point is pretty much front and foremost in our minds as we recover from the pandemic. However, there is one truth, at least in the context of the energy sector. If there is no explicit or predictable government policy that the private sector can rely on to act and decide their strategies, the smooth transition for both business and public is likely to fail. As such, planning for such a smooth transition will require, as I mentioned in the article that was published in The Edge, a whole of society and all of government approach. Every segment of our society and economy will need to step up to meet these very real risks and opportunities which we face today. Concurrently, government support by way of policies and incentives will be crucial in facilitating this journey. On this note, members of the CEO Action Network will continue to work closely with a small group of partners to facilitate a multi-ministerial engagement to strengthen our national climate ambitions. It is my sincere hope, actually it is the sincere hope of all members within CEO Action Network, that the points raised in today's session will be incorporated in the final report of recommendations for the government to consider. Together, collectively, I'm confident that the rich exchange of ideas and conversations will be able to derive and synthesize and put forward solutions for what we believe must be a shared, sustainable future. So on that note, it gives me great honor and great pleasure to pass the floor to Puan Zakiah Jaafar, the TKSU of Treasury Policy from Ministry of Finance. Thank you, Puan.
Assalamualaikum and a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Tengku Taufik. Before I begin, a quick thank you for having the Ministry of Finance be part of the stakeholder engagement. It is always a pleasure to be among compadre across the public and private sectors, as well as civil society, to discuss the impact of our climate ambition and the sort of policies that might help to facilitate this transition. And this is akin to a whole of society approach in the SDG parlance. So kudos to the organizer and participants. At this juncture, I am struck by the similarities in dealing with both the pandemic and climate change crisis. And I do consider we are in a crisis of sorts when it comes to biodiversity loss and the climate change. What is more worrying is that this climate change crisis has no vaccine or quick fix to remedy the situation. But this morning, I must begin with an apology, as the MoF is a new kid on the block in all things sustainability related. While a number of initiatives have been started by the ministry in the past, it wasn't until budget 2021 that a sustainability agenda is fully entrenched in our annual budget. Now that MoF is on the sustainability bandwagon, we can finally talk business. I can assure you that this agenda will be strengthened and widened in the upcoming budget 2022, in line with the current government's policy priorities. With the launching of a concrete recovery plan supported by our national vaccination program and complemented by 7 economic stimulus and assistance packages, totaling 380 billion ringgit so far, there is indeed a light at the end of the tunnel. Inshallah, we are going to recover from this pandemic, provided we all still adhere to the SOPs set and get vaccinated. While we are still not out of the woods yet, it is critical that we remain firm against many other challenges, including the risks from climate change. This pandemic and climate-related risks have similar devastating effects. Like COVID-19, climate change surpasses borders and can lead to various impacts on our lives and livelihoods. There is now a greater sense of urgency in addressing climate change, and the momentum has been gathering in the last couple of years or so around the world, brought about by several push and pull factors. We have seen how extreme weather brought on, among others, floods and droughts that led to health crises, as well as disruptions in food security and supply chain issues, resulting in economic and financial instabilities that affect our livelihoods and well-being. On the other hand, we have seen greater demands from trading and investment partners alike for assurance of climate and biodiversity-friendly products and a smooth transition to net zero targets. In addition, allocators of capital are increasingly demanding for robust and rigorous details of climate action strategies, failing which we may see possible downgrading in sovereign ratings, increasing reinsurance premiums, and greater number of climate refugees. There is also the risk of stranded assets in the financial system and elsewhere in the sector, which are deemed not green enough, which may have a domino effect on the economy. And if that isn't depressing enough, we have also observed that there is yet to be established a global carbon border adjustment mechanism to ensure an orderly market of carbon credit exchange. So while the advanced countries are organizing among themselves to establish such a market, developing countries tend to be left scrambling to manage the situation. Mr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, recently mentioned that the critical global fault line in climate change lies in financing clean energy investments in developing countries. We can definitely argue whether this is a fair statement or not in putting the burden on developing countries. Likewise, we can put forth some arguments ourselves. Firstly, it must be recognized that the high-income countries will need to reach their climate targets years earlier than developing countries, as they have reached advanced stages of industrialization way ahead of us. It is also incumbent upon them to provide support for our greening efforts, either via funding, sharing of technology, or in kind. And I must admit, some of them have done so. Secondly, it must be recognized that while the high-income countries are cutting their emissions, most developing countries would still need to increase theirs to meet their development needs, unless the latter could gain far more investments in shifting to a low-carbon economy. But no matter where the fault line is, we know that the capital and finance markets are efficient and quick to respond. Thus, well before the worst effects of the triple crisis of climate, biodiversity, and pollution will be felt, the capital markets and allocators of capital would have pulled this risk forward and could very well raise the cost of capital. So we must now accept the fact that the sustainability element is a critical strand that needs to be embedded into the DNA of Malaysian industries, as it will strengthen our competitive advantage, which will boost investor confidence, strengthen brands and reputations. Now, the Malaysian government fully recognizes the importance of sustainability in underpinning the country's development trajectory towards a sustainable and inclusive nation. This is a signal of policy direction to the private sector to develop their capacity and increase their resilience against impending policies and regulations. We remain committed to the sustainability development goals. Within the Malaysian government, the SDGs have been fully assimilated in our 5-year development plans, beginning with the 11 Malaysia Plan in 2016. Our latest progress showed that most of the SDGs related to the socio-economic dimension are progressing relatively well, but are underperforming for those related to environment. With due respect to my colleagues in the Economic Planning Unit, I can assure you the green growth and sustainability agenda in the upcoming 12 Malaysia Plan, which will bring us to the year 2025, is sturdier and more comprehensive in nature. If I'm allowed, some bragging rights as a rep from MoF, the SDGs are now also fully aligned to our annual development budget, beginning with budget 2021. This would enable assessment and identification of financing gaps for SDG-related projects. We are near the tail end of establishing the My SDG Trust Fund, which will be co-managed with the UN Malaysia chapter to meet financial gap for SDG-related projects. And of course, you've heard how we have successfully issued our sustainability sukuk in April, the first of its kind in the world, to the value of 1.3 billion US dollars that was oversubscribed by 6.4 times across the world. We have introduced the ecological fiscal transfer in budget 2019 with 60 million ringgit allocation to the state governments for protected area management and 70 million ringgit allocation in budget 2021 to ensure sustainability of the country's biodiversity. The MoF has also recently volunteered to lead the working group on finance for sustainable development under the national level SDG steering committee. In a recent stock taking of green initiatives relating to finance under this track, we realized we have covered some grounds, so we need not start from scratch. It's more of a matter of coordination now with related ministries and agencies, including Bank Negara Malaysia and the Securities Commission. We are also currently working with the UN Development Programme to establish an integrated national financing framework, which comprises of platforms for innovation and reforms, spanning from policy, regulation, financial instruments and institutions, including public-private collaboration. But we still need to develop a complete, unified and explicit conceptual framework for sustainable finance. And we are developing this finance roadmap together with the UK's Partnering for Accelerated Climate Transitions, or UK Pact. This roadmap will enhance coherence among a wide range of existing initiatives in the field of sustainability and inclusion. An important recent institutional improvement is, of course, the establishment of a Climate Change Action Council 2 months ago, chaired by our Honourable Prime Minister himself. It is heartening to see that this council brings together all the economic ministers and state governments to ensure policy alignment regarding climate change issues and the green development agenda. But that is only one side of the coin. The other would be ensuring implementation and enforcement are effective. We know there will be challenges at many fronts, but at least there is a national level commitment to address them in the same platform. In moving forward, of course, much more needs to be done. Transiting to a low carbon economy need not mean sacrificing traditional growth and employment. Instead, this is an opportune time for a reset and search for opportunities of new sources of growth with new job creation, or at least adjust our current modus operandi, which are kinder to the environment. The Ministry of Finance is also now reviewing its tax incentives and subsidies, as well as collaborating with relevant ministries and agencies to create a conducive ecosystem so that we can strike a balance between growth and sustainability considerations. Nevertheless, all these financial tools and incentives are but one piece of the jigsaw puzzle in the whole climate change picture. It may go a long way to incentivize behavioral change among economic actors to better appreciate our natural assets. But these initiatives are still reactive in nature. That is, we are reacting to the outcome of our own unsustainable behavior. I firmly believe that we need to be more proactive instead in addressing the root of the problem. Until and unless there is a real mindset change among all the stakeholders to appreciate, protect, conserve and nurture our natural assets, no amount of incentives can guarantee a truly sustainable development. So a paradigm shift is key in holding our natural assets with high regards. Maybe we can learn from the People's Republic of China, who has since adopted the concept of an ecological civilization, where lucid waters, green forests, and lush mountains are invaluable assets to their nation and thus should be treated as such. The private sector can meet us halfway in this effort of being more sustainable in our lifestyle and production behavior. We are here, ever ready to listen to what you require to make this shift. For that purpose, the Ministry of Finance is committed to establish a focus group with the CEO Action Network and Climate Governance Malaysia to come up with initiatives for the upcoming budget 2022. This global climate change crisis is a marathon, not a sprint. Unless everybody wins the race, nobody wins the race. Surely, Malaysia boleh. Thank you. Over to you, Dato Faiz.
Assalamualaikum and good morning. So welcome to this panel session with both our CEO, CAN CEO Tengku Taufik, as well as Puan Zakiah. Puan Zakiah, that was amazing. And you know, thank you so much for coming to MoF. And I think certainly through the Q&A session, I think we'll try and peel a little bit more of the onion as to some of the things that you mentioned. So maybe I should just start formally by thanking CAN for inviting me to moderate this panel. I don't know why, but anyway, I'm here. Also, thanks to Tengku Taufik for that opening address and call to arms. So really the objective of this panel session is really to understand better what government is thinking. And I think you mentioned a number of key things. And of course, the image of mountains and lush valleys is stuck in my mind now. Thank you very much. But maybe a little bit of a factual recap. So many of you know that this thing about reducing emissions was in a sense started off by the Paris Agreement. And our country, like many countries, had agreed to a reduction. So our reduction was, what, 35% by 2030 based on a 205 baseline. Why 205? Because in 204 we were net zero. So okay, makes sense. And that's an important point. So I know that Suriname and Bhutan are net zero, but we were net zero not that far away, or at least within living memory. In terms of our numbers, we're only 1% of global emissions. And just to make the point that actually the total amount, net 75 million tons, is not just emissions, but it's also the use of our forests to sequester carbon or absorb them. And I think that's something that we'll explore a little bit in the questions. One, about, for example, that 60 million you put aside to assist states. It'll be quite interesting to understand how are we going to encourage people to keep trees rather than cut them down. So, of course, companies are not exempted from this move. Petronas, of course, is our flag bearer in terms of being a net zero adherent. There are other companies like Axiata, MAB, and the list keeps on growing every day. I read the papers. We did run a survey, and it says 97% of the, 200 or 170 odd people on the call says yes. So I'm sure Sunita will tell me what the exact number is in a second. So to go into the questions, and maybe this goes back to government aspiration, but so we know about this reduced by 35% by 2030, and then maybe another 10% if we can get money for people to do it. But in May 2021, there was a CAN webinar where Dato Mustafa Mohammad actually said, Malaysia aspires to being a carbon neutral nation in the future as it views climate change and sustainability as an issue of high significance. So clearly there seems to be some shift, because so far we've always been talking about the reduction of 45% and so on. But now we're actually hearing views from certain ministers that the government is open to looking at a carbon neutrality type objective. So I wonder, Puan, I know it's a bit unfair for you to speak about what EPU just said, but what are your thoughts on this? Do you think our government is open to the idea of having a discussion about having a net zero target?
Yes, thank you, Dato. Maybe I start with a little bit of context here. So before the Paris Agreement, we have the Kyoto Protocol. Only the developed countries had to meet their commitments by 2020. Developing countries were exempted. But under the Paris Agreement, we all need to put forward our commitment on climate change by 2030 and report our progress therein. So naturally, the developed countries will have to lead the way with higher ambitions and expected to achieve the carbon neutral target soonest possible. So in our last report to the UN Convention, we have increased the share of renewable energy in our energy mix. We have reduced our energy intensity. We have maintained our forest cover of more than 50%, among others. So we aim to reduce GHG emissions to 45% below the 2005 level by 2030. We are at 29% in 2016, and that's the latest data we have reported in December last year. Now, as a nation, it's not as easy as, say, Petronas, maybe, to set a net zero target by a certain year. We have to balance many considerations, all and sundry. On one hand, having a target may be helpful in setting our pace and monitoring our progress while being transparent about our policy direction. However, setting it prematurely without properly considering its ramifications will lead to undue disruptions and uncertainties instead. So the government is naturally cautious in taking the step before setting any zero targets at national level. We have, I think, to put up all the policy pillars first before doing so. Doesn't mean with no such target that we cannot have a dynamic green movement and make a real impact. Certainly, this will have to be deliberated at the Climate Change Action Council.
Thank you, Puan. So I think I can summarize that as being maybe subject to balancing. But maybe I should bring Tengku Taufik in here because, well, certainly she mentioned Petronas. So in terms of your setting your net zero, I mean, I think it'll be quite interesting for many of the audience to understand that, you know, there's conventionally two ways of thinking, like, you know, plan and then do, or set a target and then work it out. So, you know, based on Petronas's experience, and of course, something that maybe government can look at, what was your experience in terms of the approach to net zero?
Thank you, Dato. Thank you for, once again, putting me on the spot. With regards to Petronas, I think there are perhaps two dimensions. One at enterprise level. At enterprise level, I have repeated this many times in a number of forums, thought leadership exchanges. Reality is there's just converging pressure on all fronts, be it investors, be it stakeholders, host authorities, counterparties, bondholders, and even more pronounced in more recent years, our own staff. I've been quoted in a number of interviews to say that it's a blessing for me. It's seen as a burden to others that I have a very young staff who are very, for lack of a better description, a very woke generation. And in that context, I think dealing with net zero was not one of the directions or actions I embraced and sold to the board because we wanted to keep up with the Joneses, because it is a reality we have to deal with. Access to financial markets, ability to partner, ability to actually have host authorities buy in on our plans. We are in a number of very developed economies which have drawn firm red lines around what you can and cannot do. So net zero was a natural way to have an all-encapsulating target and focus, a North Star target, so to speak, for our E in the ESG. I want to actually say that there is no right way for a company or indeed a country to map out or chart a net zero journey. Because as you've mentioned, you can plan and have the building blocks assembled and have all of these ducks lined up in a row and then commit. Or this is where I bring up to the second dimension on a personal level. Perhaps it's a leadership style that has been embraced by myself and the executive leadership team. It's more like what Alexander the Great did. He burned the ships. And he said, there is no way for us to go back and return to the old ways, because the new realities will compel us to deal with these net zero demands. I think Puan Zakiah very much rightly alluded to us already aspiring to meet certain targets. Petronas had even before I come on board. So I I'm very, very grateful that I've earned a legacy from people who had the foresight to start the journey. My job is now to make sure it continues, if perhaps with greater momentum. But if you think about the cap targets, the 35% you mentioned, Petronas already started the journey. We had already embarked on steps to reduce our CO2 emissions by 13 million tons in a 6 to 7 year period. As we go forward, my job is now to assemble the building blocks and help us get to 2024. The 2024 number is 49.5. We want to cap it. We want to cap our total emissions to 49.5, regardless of our growth aspirations. So the challenge is now to amp up these efforts. So you could set out a target. I think that's pretty much the approach that we've taken. Set out a target and say, let's find the building blocks. Technology will be there. Innovate, get more efficient. Think about how you're running your operations, and it comes naturally now. It comes naturally in our planning processes.
Well, so in a way, there are many parallels, right? I mean, you talk about pressures from capital providers, your staff, and your other stakeholders. And I think Puan averted to it in her speech, which is to say that you can't ignore the fact that governments borrow money. They do borrow money for the capital markets. And if we're not careful, we could be downgraded by analyst country ratings. We could find our pricing of our funding going up, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that also comes out is numbers. I mean, we're talking about 2017 numbers. So Puan, I'm just wondering, I mean, don't we have more up-to-date numbers? Because certainly yes. I've heard from a number of corporates saying that, you know, we would like to know how our number fits within the big number, right? And to do that, obviously, we rely on the government. My understanding is it's not a simple exercise to come up with that number, but perhaps you could share your views on the data question.
Yes, Dato. I'm a quantitative policy researcher myself, so I certainly appreciate the need for timely empirical data. So I must concede the data compilation on environment variables is still a challenge in Malaysia. We have made inroads with shorter reporting lags for some indicators. For instance, energy intensity, we made a progress, and the latest data is 2018. But in terms of emissions, the latest is 2016 still, and this was published in December 2020. But you know, just a quick review on the performance of these emissions, CO2 emissions. The increase is actually moderating, so there is some hope there. When I mentioned just now that our performance is at a 29% reduction in GHG emission compared to 2005 level, we are on track in that sense, even though that is like 4 years lag. You know, the reporting, what I was made to understand, is a very time-consuming process, and this is based on UN guidelines. Data needs to be checked, verified by external reviewers, but there is room for improvement, and CASA is undertaking some stepwise approach to shorten the time frame. So now they're working on shortening it to 2 to 3 years. They are working on the for the upcoming report with the 2018 reference year. But I can assure you, the MoF and EPU will see how we can assist in this area, because more often than not, it boils down to resource constraint. So at this juncture, we have many priorities to balance. Often, data collection is the way down the priority list. But since climate change is now takes on a higher significance in policy priorities, we see how we can help CASA improve the data collection and reporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I did interview Dato for one of the events that I chair. And he made a startling admission, which I didn't realize, is that actually currently ministries are not allowed to share data among ministries. And he says that that's the first thing that we have to figure out in the digital framework, which is how do we encourage ministries to share again?
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Dato. It's amazing. This crisis, there is a silver lining behind this crisis. It shows us how important it is in sharing information across the ministry. So it is something that we're also working on.
Well, I guess case in point is even the vaccine program actually collects data from different ministries to be able to figure out which areas to target more than less and so on. So we do hope, I mean, as you say, there's a silver lining in this COVID pandemic that governments now understand the need to share data. Is there anything that the private sector like Petronas could do to help in that process of getting more data up? Tengku, do you have any thoughts?
I believe now, this is why I think one of the efforts put on the ground here, the CO Action Network, one of the stated aims is capacity building. I think we were very explicit in that, Dato Faiz.
Yeah.
First off, you come back to the original principle. You and I, coming from a similar professional background, will know if it's not measured, it won't get done.
Yep.
And I think the problem at hand here is the kind of disclosures that need to be tracked and the kind of metrics that need to be tracked. Even as a starting point, we have already certain host authorities, certain authorities asking you need to adhere to SASB. There's already the TCFD convention that people adhere to. Then there are parallel tracks. I think one clear step that the profession, if I throw it back to the profession can help us on, is getting to some degree of alignment with regards to tracking this. The kind of data that needs to be put into the market not only for private sector, but indeed for governments to set policy, should help us have a degree, just like financials, a degree of comparability.
Yes.
I think that seems to be the biggest bugbear for a lot of private sector. When I sit down with the oil and gas governors under the World Economic Forum, a lot of the NOCs are recoiling. The higher levels and the higher bars that need to be met have been a burden for them, because indeed at policy level in their own host authorities, they're saying, why do I need to go down this path? Because we're not ready to make the shift just yet, but I can make commitments which are probably at a lower level. To the credit of people like Puan Zakiah, who by the way sits on my board, she has been lifting the bar on what kind of disclosures that people like Petronas have to do. And Petronas has embarked on its effort to start issuing integrated reports. Our listed entities have already embraced the need to issue integrated reports for some time now. But Petronas itself, as an NOC, there's a dual track getting to an integrated report, as well as a commitment to the WEF to meet its stakeholder capitalism metrics. There's a very small group which has adhered to this. Again, it's the whole Alexander burning his ships phenomenon happening at the executive leadership team. I think we do have a lot of evangelical members within my executive leadership team. I just happen to be at the tip of the spear in voicing this out. One thing we've discovered in our exchanges at CO Action Network, and I think that Sunita, who's also present, will see this, there are varying degrees of maturity. And we have to make sure the ability to respond to a baseline does not unduly handicap some people from getting, indeed, customers access to financial metrics. So there's a pathway for that.
Well, just to let you know, there is an organization or grouping of capital market regulators called ACMF. And they are currently looking at it to try and figure out for the 10 ASEAN countries, what is that minimum baseline of information that's needed. And I believe that they're trying to get that paper out by about October to ACMF, because obviously the capital market regulators themselves. Yeah. And I think your point about maturity will definitely come into it, because you've got countries like Laos, Cambodia, and then you've got Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, right? Okay, so Puan, just coming back to you again, and now you were hinting about things that have happened before, like this ecological, help to states for 60 million. So actually, it's an interesting question, right? Because we're a federal state kind of setup, and I believe all the land actually belongs to the state, not federal. And so you can't blame state, right? Because there's a limit to how much they can get in terms of taxes. So of course they use whatever natural resources they have.
Yep.
So how does this 60 million work? And just then widening it a bit wider, what are some of the thought processes MoF are going through now with respect to next year's budget?
Yeah. Dato, I do have a standard official answer to that, but I'm going to be frank now.
Okay.
So, if if you've been in the policy making circle for long, you will know that often we want it all, we want it now. So something has to give. I always ask this question to the whichever administration: what do we want? What can we sacrifice? How can we balance everything that we want? In terms of pursuing a green agenda, how does, for instance, I'd be very much interested to see how MITI will deal with the industrial master plan. They are reviewing the industrial master plan. How does the sustainable agenda or the green agenda is embedded in that master plan? I have yet to hear a coherent answer on this. So this, I think, we have to ask ourselves, what do we want? Of course, we are looking at many things now, policies, both tax and non-tax incentives to push the green economy. We are looking at promoting renewable energy investments, sustainable industries and environment. We're looking at sustainable infrastructure and sustainable cities that's post-COVID-19, that fits post-COVID-19 world. And this probably includes a demand side management for energy. We are encouraging low carbon mobility. We are promoting construction of green buildings, and more details will be shared in the upcoming 12 Malaysia plan. But ultimately, what we are looking at is the creation of a vibrant green economy, including new jobs, as I mentioned, formation of ecotourism, and we do have potential, lots of potential in that area, and green transport systems, as well as supply chains of green products. We have started we do have a green procurement agenda within the MoF. We are looking at that and how to make it more inclusive, because at the moment, this green agenda seems to be taken on board by the bigger companies. How does the SMEs going to be part of this whole ecosystem? Because they don't have a luxury to appoint a sustainability unit or officer. So how we are going to have that? So in that sense, we are trying to see the whole ecosystem, the big picture in this sense. So give us a bit of time. As I mentioned, MoF is a newbie. I don't have any experts here. I just sent 2 of my officers for training for green finance. So slowly we are building the capacity as well. CASA has an ally in MoF. So we're working very closely with them on this.
So I think you did mention, Puan, that you're happy to engage with CAN on some of these ideas of the budget.
Yeah.
Of course, we get inundated with them, like, can you give tax exemptions for energy audits and all sorts of things. But what we'll do is we'll compile this and then come have a conversation. But maybe now to go to the questions, because we've got about 50 minutes left. There are about 18 of them, but they seem to be thematic. So maybe taking Regina's question first, because she typed it in before anyone else did at 10:08. So Regina's question is this: isn't 2050 a bit too late? We've already been seeing major issues relating to climate change. We need to do more in the next 9 years. I guess, I think, Puan, you've already made the point that as a responsible government, you have to play this balancing act, right? Between obviously economic development, but saving our resources, what have you. Do you think it's too late to even be talking about this?
I don't think so. It's not. We haven't set ourselves any target in 2050 anyway. But we are moving.
So
we are moving.
We can't be late. We have no target, kan?
Yeah, we have all these little targets. Under the SDG, we have about 6-7 goals there directly related to environment. Of course, we are using that as our embedded also in the 5-year plan. So it's together with the rest, the targets of for the rest of the ministries. So We do have all these little targets moving towards the net zero ultimate objective, but we just don't set exactly when until we know for sure we are ready to go there. And I think that's what I'm very happy with that Climate Change Action Council, because for once everybody sits in the same room and trash it out.
Yes,
So I think that's a good platform for us to leverage.
excellent. Well, I mean, to be fair, we're only 1% of the global emissions anyway, so maybe they should pick on the bigger guys, right? Then the next question is interesting. So there are already a lot of awareness programs, but the biggest issue remains, what do we do? Which industries are primarily responsible for the carbon emissions? And national recovery plan, we need to have a national framework, something like that. So I guess maybe perhaps it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Puan and Tengku, but most of our emissions actually are from the energy side and transportation. I believe agriculture is like 3%. So really the elephant in the room, unfortunately, is Tengku. Not that you're an elephant, but basically representing that industry. But really from the point of view of setting up plans, so I guess we have the 12 Malaysia plan, right? That's about to be announced. And as you say, we should be looking out for those elements which are green. So the next question, SDG Council is chaired by PM. Will there be a sub-technical group covering the subsets of SDG? I guess the answer is yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we do have a national level SDG Council, and under that is the SDG Steering Committee. And under that, there are 5 working groups, to cover all the 17 SDGs. So we volunteered to head the working group on the finance. So we're working now with the Bank Negara and Security Commission first to take stock what we have done so far. And as I mentioned just now, we need not start from scratch. Bank Negara and Securities Commission, they are ahead of us in terms of setting up the guidelines on what constitute green investments. They have the taxonomy and all that. So on that, they've started something. So on our side, we're looking at all the incentives, to motivate people to create a better ecosystem. So at the moment, work in progress in that sense. Dato.
Okay, so but of course, CASA is the secretariat anyway, right? So clearly you have access to the resources, the MICAC. The next question is, as for financing, has the standard of a green project been properly defined? For example, greenhouse removal of gas or avoidance? I think the answer is yes. I mean, there have been various sustainability finance definitions coming out from the Securities Commission. And maybe just to highlight that 2 taxonomies that we have in Malaysia, one which BNM has announced about the classification of bank customers into are you good or bad for the environment. But there's also the Securities Commission one, which is due later this year, that actually takes up your point, Puan, about what exactly constitutes a sustainability project or green project. So I think akan datang. But already there are some guidances, particularly if you think about the green sukuk semua kan, it's already there.
That's right. So just a bit of an update. Because we are also going to establish this My SDG Trust Fund to meet financing gap for selected for SDG related projects that may not be high in our radar in the Ministry of Finance or government. So we're going to meet that financing gap. And we are also working with the UN on the framework on what constitutes sustainability or constitute green. So in that sense, there's more and more guidelines to make it clear and transparent in this way.
Okay. So what's next? I really hate long questions because to read it. Energy underpins all aspects of life. Energy system not decarbonized. There's no nature nurture. So really, I guess this picks up a common theme in a number of the questions, which really talks about, our RE target. Are we going to achieve all this reduction by 2030? But also the fact that a lot of our energy is still fossil fuel related. So, Puan, I believe that there's an energy master plan coming out later this year to address this. But I was told that there's still elements of fossil within it. And so I guess we can't run away from the fact that coal is probably one of the cheapest, items to use. But I also seem to recall seeing something from Tenaga announcing that they're not planning to do any more coal plants.
That's right.
But is there anything else that perhaps you could share with us about the use of fossil fuels?
Yeah, well, I just went through the chapter on green growth in the 12 Malaysia plan. You have to wait until probably third or fourth quarter for that details. I don't want to, steal their thunder on that.
But certainly, Puan, going back to Tengku Taufik's point, while government decides these policies, the market's reacting. We've already seen a number of foreign banks saying no more carbon powered plants and so on.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question is, isn't there a major disconnect between being carbon neutral and energy plans? Focus so far has been emitting supply side. Okay, so this is a slight tweak. We've been talking about emissions, but not so much about the consumption demand side. And I guess this segues to the question of EVs. So I have an EV car. It's a pain trying to charge it. I know there's plans to put out thousands of this around, but they never seem to be near my house. So, are there some thoughts about perhaps having a national electric vehicle plan?
That's also my question to Miti. My household also have an EV. Thank you to Petronas, who has all these charging station and all the at your petrol station. But there are five bays in KLIA. Block C, one is always out of whack, So while we have this, I'm wondering who's going to invest in the infrastructure to support EV vehicles. We can, our automotive industry can produce it, but who's going to cover the infrastructure? So that's always my question to Miti. So we're still waiting for an answer. But I think they will have to also balance because we do have a traditional automotive industry. So how this will be embedded in the overall industry master plan. So they have to answer it. I've been told this master plan should come up by end of the year or early next year. So they still need time to engage with the industries to cover up the way forward.
Okay. I guess in some of the ideas that we're coming to you, I have to say as a tenant, it's very frustrating, right? Because you can't put solar panels on someone else's building and you can't force the owner to put more EV bays unless you pay money and so on. So I think there may be a need as part of that plan to think about retrofitting. How do you get building owners to take some responsibility to putting panels and perhaps charging stations, so at least I can get home again. There needs to be major relook at energy plans, so I think we covered that. Very good presentation, extremely encouraging. Oh, well done. On the ground, I need help because reps from local council, schools, business managers know very little on climate change. We should do much, much more. Yeah, totally agree. So I think that's more statement than a question. Next one is about cars. We have auto manufacturing capability. When are we going to take advantage of being an EV hub? Thailand's already overtaking us. Actually, Thailand always overtakes us on cars because they've got more car plants. But anyway, so I think it's the same thing that you mentioned, that as part of the MITI plan, hopefully many of these things will be addressed. Next question, EV again. There needs to be a rapid target for EV. Some countries and cities are phasing out sale. Well, I guess what they're saying is your next Aston Martin after 2030 will have to be electric or Rolls Royce. So we'll have to figure out how to charge it. Next one.
I don't know this. I know that we are all very much into moving straight away into the green lifestyle, but I wonder, I wonder whether we should leave our traditional lifestyle altogether. We need not do that. We need not. I know we hear a lot of this transition in other countries and all that, but we need to take all this with a pinch of salt. So
Well,
don't be too alarmist. Don't be.
It's not so much being alarmist. I guess, as you say, it's about thinking of new ideas, guys. Because if you're going to park your car for 30 minutes at a petrol station to charge it, then you must have a decent coffee shop. Okay?
Yes.
I mean, that's the new business, right? That we create charging stations with a coffee shop, and then you datang simbang. So we can all agree we're all going to charge our cars at a particular time. Hopefully, a Petronas station, Tengku, and we'll find someone to provide the coffee. Okay, now another very long question was reminding everyone that Malaysia was okay. So I think we've covered, but I think that's more of a statement. Okay, next one. Thank you for sharing some targets. May I know if there's any revision in the renewable target? This thing about is it 25 by
20% by 2025, I recall. Yeah.
That's the one. So we only got a few years. So are we going to revise that one? Or is
again, that's included in the 12th plan. I can review it.
Okay. But Puan, just to let you know, in some of our outreach with FDI candidates, they've actually been bringing up the fact that one of the crosses against Malaysia is the fact that they themselves have their own commitments back home. And so the more renewable that they can access, the more likely they'll come to Malaysia, because from their point of view, they don't want to be tainting their own commitments.
MITI has already approached us on this, voicing the concerns that this is an additional requirements by FDIs. So we are looking into it as well, working with CASA and CATSA on this to see how best we can meet the needs of the new needs of the FDI. It's no longer, sometimes the tax incentives can only work so much. So we are looking at the whole package to attract FDIs to Malaysia.
Excellent. Well, we're running out of time, Puan, but this next question is a data question. So he totally agrees that it'll take time to get things to work under the UNFCCC. But he says it would be useful in the compilation of data to also have trajectory, meaning based on those trends, are we winning or losing? So as you avert to just now, it appears that we're winning.
But that is correct, because when I look at that report, it's very just described, it doesn't have a judgment. So I think we need to make that, that's the second stage, I think, by CASA, whether we are on track or not.
Very well. Running out of time, what's the transition past that? MoF issued ESG Sukuk, well, a statement, not question. Is there a public dashboard by the federal where all can see the progress of government with regards to sustainability?
Yes, there is. Oh, there is. We are fortunate that our chief statistician is very into it meets our policy needs. So you can look at there's a special website on SDGs performance, and just an update. Every 2-3 years we go to New York HQ to present the progress on our SDGs. We did so in 2019. Now coming up, I think in July or August, July, I think. This is what we call the voluntary national report. We voluntarily report to the UNHQ on our progress. So the report is ready. Cabinet has approved it. So that's the numbers that I spew just now. Those are included in that report. Yeah.
Okay. So when will that be presented to the UN?
I think July, if I'm not mistaken. So on the government side, it's all approved already. So you have all the numbers there, and you can check out on DOSM, Department of Statistics Malaysia website for the SDGs progress.
Thank you very much. So Puan, I'm afraid I've not done justice to all the myriads of questions, so I apologize to all of those who bothered to type up long questions. Really, just to conclude, thank you very much, Puan. I think it's been really refreshing to listen to you, and also the fact that I take from your presentation that government is open to particularly what the private sector has said or would like to assist you on, and so on. And as you said, it's about a whole of society approach. So it's not just relying on government or relying on private sector. It is in combination. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you to Taufik, and I'll hand you back to Sunita. Sunita?
Thank you so much. I'm sure we all agree this was just a brilliant conversation we've had today. Thank you to Puan Zakiah, Tengku Taufik, Dato Faiz. This is exactly the sort of policy signaling we need to hear. We really appreciate that while Puan Zakiah shared some standard official answers, but we are deeply encouraged by her understanding and staunch support of the green or sustainability agenda. And I am sure this is going to be echoed by the Minister in the JC3 conference, which is starting tomorrow with his keynote on Thursday afternoon. This is open to the public. So just to remind that the private sector needs to make certain judgments around the climate crisis, whether it will be positioned on the right or wrong side of climate history, whether there's value being created or destroyed in the transition. Do we want to be using tomorrow's money to fund yesterday's technologies and businesses, especially when we observe the ever lengthening tail of technologically obsolescent solution and assets? Is the attitude we need, as Tengku Taufik has noted, Alexander burning ships to ensure that there's no turning back? After all, there are resources available to smooth the transition, whether mitigation and adaptation plans. And this is absolutely a partnership. All of government, whole of society, we need this whole of nation approach for an orderly and accelerated transition. But how can private and public sector meet except on fertile ground? And unfortunately, as Puan Zakiah puts it, we want it all, we want it now. What is the alternative? There are many consequences which we might not be able to or willing to bear. And also, we don't want to end up with a tragic situation where children who have the least responsibility for the triple crisis of climate, biodiversity, and pollution end up bearing the greatest burden. Thank you all so much for attending. Do sign up for the rest of the roundtable sessions coming up in July and August. And please feel free to contribute your recommendations as well. We will take this into account. Thank you so much, everyone. And see you at the next session. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.